A cargo ship leaves the Bani terminal in Nigeria's Niger Delta loaded with oil. It sails to Europe, where that oil is refined, sold, and turned into profit. Back in Nigeria's oil-rich Niger Delta, the land is scarred, the water is polluted, and the people who once farmed and fished there now struggle to survive. Is this just bad luck? Or is there a pattern? We're told that development is about tall buildings, fast internet, and big numbers on a spreadsheet. We see glossy images of highways, shopping malls, and skyscrapers and are told that's what progress looks like. But is that the whole story? Is development just about having more things, or is there something deeper at play? Walter Rodney, a Guyanese historian, activist, and revolutionary, challenges us to look beneath the surface in his classic book How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Rodney argues that true development isn't just about material wealth or technology, it's about who controls the resources, who benefits from growth, and whose lives are actually improved. He asks us to question, development for whom and at what cost? Take Ghana, one of the world's top cocoa producers. Every year, millions of tons of cocoa beans are shipped out. But most chocolate is made, and most profits are kept, in Europe and North America. A Ghanaian farmer might never taste the chocolate made from his own crop. He gets a few dollars. The chocolate company gets millions. Rodney's point? Development for some is built on underdevelopment for others. Rodney doesn't blame geography or bad culture. He points to history, real, concrete events and systems that shaped the fate of a continent. He reminds us of the transatlantic slave trade, which didn't just uproot millions of people, but stole generations of labor, knowledge, and community from Africa. Entire societies were torn apart, and the effects still echo today. Then came colonialism, which claimed to bring civilization, but instead built railways and roads not for the benefit of Africans, but to extract Africa's wealth. Gold, diamonds, cocoa, oil, these riches were shipped out to enrich Europe, while African communities were left with little but scars and empty promises. And when the colonial powers finally drew borders, they did so with rulers and maps in distant capitals, splitting families, tribes, and nations, and often forcing rivals to live together. These artificial borders fueled conflict and division that still haunt the continent. Rodney's message is clear. Africa's underdevelopment was not an accident of nature, but the result of deliberate, historical processes of exploitation and control. He writes, "Colonialism had only one hand. It was a one-armed bandit. But it's not just history. Today, multinational companies still control Africa's oil, minerals, and farmland. And nowhere is this clearer than in the oil-rich Niger Delta. Here's how it works. Multinational oil giants negotiate with corrupt local leaders, often behind closed doors. They confiscate ancestral lands, promising jobs and development. But what do the people get? Polluted rivers, destroyed farmland, and poverty, while the oil and the profits flow out to foreign capitals. The indigenous people, once self-sufficient, are left with little but environmental devastation and broken promises. The companies get rich. The leaders get a cut. The people get left behind. Chinwezu, a Nigerian critic and author of The West and the Rest of Us, exposes how Africa is treated as a vassal state, a source of cheap raw materials and cheap labor for the imperial countries. He writes, "Africa is a vassal state, providing raw materials and cheap labor, while the West controls the technology, the capital, and the markets." Chinwezu explains that even when assembly plants are set up in Africa, it's rarely about building local industry or empowering African workers. More often, it's a strategy by multinational corporations to take advantage of cheap labor and avoid tariffs, while keeping the real profits and decision-making power in the hands of the imperial powers abroad. He describes how Africa continues to export raw materials, rubber, cocoa, minerals, oil, while importing finished goods at prices set by the West. The real value is always added elsewhere, in European or American factories, where the technology, branding, and profits are concentrated. Africa is left with the lowest paying jobs and the environmental costs, while the wealth flows out. Take the car industry as an example. Major automakers have set up assembly plants in countries like South Africa and Nigeria. They import car parts from Europe or Asia, assemble the vehicles using local labor paid at a fraction of Western wages, and then sell the finished cars at world market prices, often far beyond what most local people can afford. The cars may be made in Africa, on paper, but the real money goes back to the parent companies overseas. Or look at the tech industry. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, cobalt is mined under harsh and dangerous conditions for use in smartphones and electric cars. The miners, often working for pennies a day, see almost none of the wealth their labor creates. Meanwhile, global tech giants and automakers make billions selling the finished products to consumers around the world. Chinweeze's point is clear. Africa is locked into a system where it supplies the basics and does the hardest work, but the real value, the profits, the technology, the power, ends up in the hands of the imperial powers. The continent is kept dependent, while the West continues to set the rules and reap the rewards. But Rodney warns, don't fall for the blame game that only points fingers at corrupt leaders. He shows that after independence, many African leaders became puppets of the West, not just by accident, but by design. He writes, "The agents of the imperialist system are often Africans who are in the service of the capitalist class in their own countries and in the metropoles. These leaders are often kept in power by Western support, and their corruption is part of a system that benefits the West. They sign deals that drain resources, take loans that create debt traps, and enforce policies that keep their own people poor, while the wealth flows out." Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president and a leading voice for African unity, called this neo-colonialism. In his book Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, Nkrumah wrote, "The essence of neo-colonialism is that the state which is subject to it is, in theory, independent. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside." So what would real development look like? Rodney says it's not about copying Europe or America. It's about people having control over their own resources, making their own choices, and building systems that serve everyone, not just a few. So what would real development look like? Rodney says it's not about copying Europe or America, or measuring progress by skyscrapers and imported cars. Real development is about people having control over their own resources, making their own choices, and building systems that serve everyone, not just a privileged few at the top. It means breaking free from dependency so that the wealth created by a country's land, labor, and creativity stays at home and benefits the whole society. It's about investing in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and opportunities that lift everyone up. Example: when Botswana renegotiated its diamond contracts, it kept more profits at home, funding schools, hospitals, and roads. The country's leaders insisted on a bigger share of the value and used it to improve the lives of ordinary citizens, not just foreign shareholders. Another example: in Ethiopia, the government invested heavily in local manufacturing and agriculture, building industrial parks and supporting small farmers. By focusing on adding value to its own raw materials, like processing coffee beans locally instead of just exporting them raw, Ethiopia has created more jobs, increased exports, and begun to reduce its reliance on foreign aid. But real development is often blocked by powerful outside forces. Institutions like the World Bank and IMF claim to help developing countries, but their loans often come with strings attached, forcing governments to cut spending on health and education, privatize public assets, and open markets to foreign corporations. These so-called structural adjustment programs have left many countries deeper in debt, more dependent, and less able to chart their own course. As Rodney and other revolutionaries warn, true development can't happen as long as the rules are written in Washington, London, or Paris. It requires breaking free from the grip of global financial institutions and reclaiming the right to decide what's best for the people at home. Real development is possible when countries take control of their destinies, prioritize their people, and refuse to let outsiders dictate the terms. It's not easy, and it's never perfect, but it's a path toward dignity, justice, and true independence. Whenever you hear a country described as underdeveloped, consider these questions. Who is really profiting from this arrangement? Who is setting the rules and controlling the resources? Imagine if development was measured by justice, dignity, and self-determination for all, rather than just wealth or infrastructure. Walter Rodney makes it clear: underdevelopment isn't a matter of fate or bad luck. It's the outcome of a deliberate system. And every system, no matter how entrenched, can be challenged and changed. The world is waiting. Organize. Resist. Unbreakable.